Good afternoon. This is a test on WebEx. Test 1, 2.
Thank you. We can hear you.
Thank you.
That one. Yeah. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good. Good afternoon and welcome. I call to order the Subcommittee on Oversight. I'm not going to talk with my mask. I never do. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. Many are watching in their offices. Welcome aboard. You're coming back to vote. And thank you for everyone for joining us. We're holding this hearing in a hybrid format in compliance with the regulations for remote committee proceedings pursuant to House Resolution 8. So before we turn to today's important topic and important guest, I want to remind members of a few procedures to help you navigate this hybrid format. First, consistent with regulations, the committee will keep microphones muted to limit background noise. Members joining virtually are responsible for unmuting themselves when they seek recognition or when recognized for their 5 minutes. Committee staff will mute members only in the event of an inadvertent background noise. Second, when members are present in the proceeding via WebEx, they must have their cameras on. If you need to step away to attend another proceeding, please turn your camera and the audio off rather than logging out of the platform. Finally, we will dispense with our practice of observing the Gibbons rule and instead go in order of seniority for questioning, alternating between majority, minority, beginning with members of Oversight, the subcommittee. Now, I guess we got it. We're going to have a tally before we get started. Who's here? I thank you for your continued patience, everyone, as we navigate these procedures to continue serving our country together in a great time of need. And with that, I will now turn to the important topic of today's hearing with the National Taxpayer Advocate on the challenges facing taxpayers. Good afternoon, and welcome to our first Oversight Subcommittee in a little while. In this hearing, I want to welcome the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Rice. As our new ranking member, I look forward to working together, and thank you for joining us, Tom. Our hearing today is on the challenges taxpayers face in the 2022 filing season. We're very fortunate to have with us the National Taxpayer Advocate, Erin Collins, as our sole witness. This is Ms. Collins' first appearance before the subcommittee, and I welcome you warmly. The National Taxpayer Advocate just released her organization's annual report to Congress. That is correct. In it, Ms. Collins expressed serious concern about the current filing season. She indicates there will be challenges for taxpayers, tax professionals, and the IRS. Indeed, members of the Ways and Means Committee are aware of these many challenges because the Treasury Department and the IRS recently briefed us. I look forward to Ms. Collins' perspective in these challenges. The Taxpayer Advocate Service is an independent organization established within the IRS to help taxpayers, individuals, and businesses. This office exists to help address specified, unresolved problems for taxpayers. We appreciate what this service does for our constituents. We in Congress have an obligation to work closely with the National Taxpayer Advocate, the IRS, the Treasury Department to address these problems. It is incumbent upon us to improve our constituents' filing experience. In our third COVID filing season, it is essential eligible taxpayers receive the recovery rebate credits and the child tax credits to which they were entitled in this lifetime. The IRS was generally successful in getting this aid to taxpayers during the pandemic. But this year, taxpayers will seek to reconcile what they received with what they are owed in their tax returns. We know there are some inconsistencies in what the IRS says has been paid to some taxpayers and what taxpayers actually received. I look forward to hearing the National Taxpayer Advocate's perspective on steps taxpayers could take to avoid problems and how we can help. Any hearing on the filing season is not complete without a general update on fraught IRS operations. We must understand how IRS operations impact the problems taxpayers will encounter during this upcoming filing season. I was pleased to learn yesterday that the IRS is transitioning away from the use of facial recognition technology. I can only give you my opinion. To allow taxpayers access to their IRS online accounts. There are serious privacy concerns with the use of this technology. I look forward to working with the IRS and the administration to find solutions that balance the need for identity theft protections against privacy concerns raised by this technology. Most importantly, taxpayers must have an alternative to this kind of technology for assessing their IRS account. I also know that taxpayers are confused by the automated notices they are receiving for returns already filed and taxes already paid. The backlog of returns and correspondence is delaying refunds, causing numerous issues for both individuals and businesses. From funding to staffing, I expect the National Taxpayer Advocate will share her perspective on how they affect the taxpayer's filing experience. And we have talked about some problematic things about this, which show concern. So while this may be a good move, we have to look at the consequences and where we're going and to stop a lot of other problems. So I welcome today's witness, National Taxpayer Advocate Erin Collins. But first I will recognize for 5 minutes the ranking member, my friend Mr. Rice, for his opening remarks. Mr. Rice, welcome aboard.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing today. I'd like to thank our National Taxpayer Advocate for being here to address the crisis the IRS is facing this filing season. And before I go on with this opening statement, I want to say that I recognize that we've placed some extraordinary burdens on the IRS within the last couple of years, and they have done a remarkable job at doing things that they're normally not called to do. And so I want to say thank you to the IRS for that. But we also have the latest data provided by the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. It shows the IRS has a backlog of around 16 million unresolved 2021 returns. I think you said 23 million earlier, but wherever that exact number is, that's 16 million individuals, families, and businesses, many of whom have been waiting on a much-needed refund for months with no end in sight. That is millions of families who can't get calls answered by the IRS, and some of them have even received collection notices for failure to file returns that they have in fact already filed. Meanwhile, we understand that the IRS has over $1 billion in unobligated funds that it received last year from the American Rescue Plan. You heard that right. The IRS has over $1 billion in funding that it appears to be saving for a rainy day. Well, that rainy day, my friends, is now. I expect we will hear some on this dais say that the IRS needs more money. And I suggest that more money is not always, that money is not always the problem. And if it is, the agency certainly has a huge pile of it sitting around. In January, I sent a letter along with Representatives Brady, Granger, and Womack to the IRS Commissioner asking why the agency hasn't spent these funds to resolve or mitigate the backlog. We've not received an answer, and just last week we sent a follow-up letter. Mr. Chairman, I ask that both these letters be made a part of the record. We need the IRS to take drastic action to address this problem, and I'm concerned the agency is not taking this as seriously as it needs to. Standard operating procedure and basic bureaucratic adjustments won't get the job done. Just last week, the former taxpayer advocate Nina Olson published an op-ed in the Washington Post making several recommendations that align with the drastic action that my colleagues and I have been calling for. Mr. Chairman, I ask that Mrs. Olson's op-ed be made a part of the record.
It will be.
I'm sorry?
No objection.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Olson makes the following recommendations. Pause audits for 4 months and repurpose audit personnel to work the backlog. Classify IRS employees, and this has to be done. Classify IRS employees as essential workers so that employees will be required to report to work in person at return processing centers. I'm shocked that that hasn't already been done. Deploy all, because IRS employees are absolutely essential workers. Deploy all available enforcement personnel to work on the backlog. Bring back retired audit and collection employees to help the agency this filing season, and use technology to reduce tax return manual returns. These recommendations are all worth consideration given the scope of the problem and the number of taxpayers impacted by the current backlog. To be honest, I'm a bit hesitant about pausing all audits. I used to be a tax lawyer and a CPA. That would be a serious action that could have a serious impact on the agency. But in the end, I think this type of drastic action that should be considered to mitigate this problem. That's how serious is the current crisis is. On the issue of additional IRS funding, Mrs. Olson wrote the following: long-term funding for new hires will not bring immediate relief to the beleaguered individual taxpayers or get them their tax refunds any quicker. The IRS announced last week that it has taken some steps to redeploy certain IRS employees to work the backlog. The agency estimates that this redeployment will involve up to 1,200 employees. And on the issue of money to hire new people, it's my understanding the IRS has been trying to hire 5,000 people for a year, and they've actually hired only less than 200. This is the redeployment of the 1,200 employees is good news and a step in the right direction, but I suspect additional actions will be needed to make a real dent in the massive backlog, and more long-term funding is not the answer for today's problems. Mrs. Collins, thank you for being here. I look forward to your testimony and the opportunity to ask questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. I just want to say, before I get into the next phase, is that no one from this committee should ever send a letter to the IRS and not get an answer. That's unacceptable. So I've already started the inquiry. Without objection, thank you, Mr. Rice, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. Now we're going to turn to our witness, Erin Collins, who has joined us here in person to discuss a very important issue. Our witness today is Erin Collins, the current National Taxpayer Advocate. Your statement will be made part of the record in its entirety. I would ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes or less. To help you with that time, please keep an eye on the clock. If you go over your time, I'll notify you and stop. Tap my gavel. Ms. Collins, you are welcome to hear, and you are welcome anytime. So give us your best.
Thank you, Chairman. So Chairman Pasquale, Ranking Member Rice, and members of the subcommittee, Thank you for inviting me to testify at today's hearing on challenges facing taxpayers. As I wrote in my recent annual report to Congress, this past year has been the most challenging for taxpayers and tax practitioners have ever experienced. Millions of taxpayers are still waiting for their refunds from last year. Taxpayers who called the IRS toll-free line were only able to talk with an IRS employee 11% of the time. Thousands of businesses are still waiting for the employee retention credit benefits that the CARES Act provided. And although the IRS's Where's My Refund tool received more than 632 million hits last year, it was unable to provide useful information. A toxic combination of office closures early in the pandemic, inadequate staffing, antiquated IT systems, and the need to divert resources from core work to administering 3 rounds of stimulus payments, the monthly child tax credit payments, and several financial relief programs created an unprecedented imbalance between the IRS's workload and the resources it was able to do the work. During the past 18 months, the inventory backlog has continued to snowball. We need to put the processing backlog behind us. We need to get the IRS out of the hole it currently finds itself in and get the IRS to a stable and healthy condition so it can perform its core mission. When I released my annual report last month, I said that paper is the IRS's kryptonite and the agency is buried in it. I want to elaborate on that point because paper remains at the heart of the agency's challenges in processing tax return. For context, the IRS receives approximately 170 million individual income tax returns last year. About 90% were filed electronically, and if there were no problems, it was quickly processed and any refund was paid under 21 days. But paper is different. The IRS still transcribes paper returns line by line, number by number. The IRS received around 17 million original paper returns last year, and the processing delays have run as long as 10 months. The IRS still has around 3 million returns that must be scanned, transcribed, and processed. And when the IRS requires additional information or proposes an adjustment, it sends the IRS or sends the taxpayer a written notice. Taxpayers respond in writing, causing more delays. All of these delays contribute to the taxpayer's frustration and confusion. The main question I'm sure you and millions of taxpayers are asking is, what can the IRS do now to get out of this paper backlog? And as we see it, there are 2 plausible options. One, leverage our own people, and consider also some outside vendors to assist with some of the clerical work. The other option is automation of some of its work. For background, there are 2 IRS functions involved in processing of a tax return: submission processing and account management. Submission processing is the first step in the process. Paper original returns are transcribed, and paper original amended returns are transcribed and worked in submission processing or scanned for accounts management. By contrast, accounts management consists of what most people think of the folks who answer the phone, customer service representatives. But they also process amended returns and paper correspondence. So last week, the IRS announced an inventory surge team. The commissioner is currently reassigning 1,200 employees to the account management designed to help process amended returns and correspondence. This is an important first step. Also, the IRS announced it will be suspending some of the automated notices until the IRS gets current with the correspondence. This additional step should reduce phone calls and eliminate the need for additional correspondence, and more importantly, reduce some taxpayer frustrations. And third, the IRS is looking into options for additional resources in submission processing function, which would provide a much-needed relief. The second viable option is to automate the paper process through scanning technologies with the goal of automating the process so that returns can be machine-read and then avoid the need for humans, employees, to manually key in each number. In closing, taxpayer service must improve. And for that to happen, the IRS needs to eliminate the backlog, pay out those delayed refunds, and get current on its work. Americans deserve better. Our citizens deserve a responsive, respectful tax administration that serves all taxpayers fairly and timely. And I look forward to working with you and answering any questions.
You've got 35 years of tax law behind you, right? You add them all up.
Yeah, I stop at 35, but yes.
So we're talking to the right person. You're the voice of the taxpayers. When they don't call us, they want to get a real answer, they call you. So that's where we are. I mean, you've been dropped into this mess because a lot of changes occurred in the last year, and you said it. If you don't know what you're doing, you're going to cause more problems. You have 35 years of distinguished service, so you're the person for the job, I presume.
I'd like to think so.
And I believe you. So you're going to be straight with us when we ask you questions?
I try to be, yes.
And we don't want to mess. I know Tom, enough about Tom to know that he doesn't like to mess either. And I know you'll be straight on your answers. I believe it, else I wouldn't ask them. I'd find out from somebody else. So I'm counting on you to be straight with us. Because in your few remarks that you have made, probably we know some of that already, but we have confidence that you will give us the straight answers of how to clear up this mess. Because we've been talking about these things for 10 years, at least. So some of the questions are going to be straight at you, and I hope you'll be straight back. You gave excellent and specific testimony, Ms. Collins. You identified the backlog, but we heard that last year too, and you know that. The biggest issue for taxpayers this filing season is the backlog. What can IRS do to increase staffing assigned to process returns this filing season, and how realistic is adding new staff given the IRS's budget woes?
Yeah, I think the challenge of hiring new employees, what the IRS has seen is recently they advertised for 5,000 positions in the campuses. Those are the ones that process the tax returns. Unfortunately, we only received, as Mr. Chairman, as Congressman Rice said, less than 200 individuals that applied for the positions. It is a challenge we have in the market. We are facing difficulties bringing in new people. And also the challenge with the campuses, they physically have to be in there to do the paper returns. So we're limited by jurisdiction to the 3 campuses that actually hire. So that is a challenge. I do not think we're going to be able to hire enough people to get us out of this hole. So we have to leverage the folks that we have and maybe consider go outside for outside vendors to assist us with a lot of the manual work that we need to do with respect to the paper return. I think those two can be done immediately. We can get our employees in to help process these returns and use our current employees as well as outsource to get some additional clerical assistance.
Now, you can't recommend and have it done unless folks are cooperating with you. How many months have you been on the job?
I started on March 30th, 2020, right when COVID was sort of ramping up.
And what happened?
With respect to COVID?
No, what happened in terms of your workers?
Well, all of our workers, you know, we were lucky. A lot of our folks were already equipped with computers and phones because we did work remotely. So TAS itself was able to, in less than a week, get our people back operational, and we were working full time. In fact, a lot of our employees have been working overtime since COVID began.
The IRS sent about $500 million stimulus payments and issued advanced child tax credits to 36 million families. I think those numbers are pretty close to what it was.
That's my recollection, yes.
How can taxpayers be sure they have the correct amounts for these payments on their returns so they do not delay their refunds?
Yeah, that is a challenge that we faced last year. We had over 11 million tax returns that had an inconsistency on their stimulus payments than what IRS records reflected. What the IRS is trying to do this year are twofold. One, they're sending a letter out to the individual taxpayers indicating what IRS records say the number is for the stimulus payment. They're also sending a separate letter which indicates the amount of the monthly child tax credit payments that have gone out the door. If the taxpayer's information is consistent with that, that return should go through processing without any delays and the refund should be paid. If there is an inconsistency, the IRS could pull that return out of the system and either make a math error adjustment or contact the taxpayer in order to clear up the discrepancy.
The IRS sent, do you know the difference between last year and the year before in terms of what we just described? I mean, is there much difference? We hired a few more people last year, but is there much difference in the percentages of people that got what they had coming? Well, we know the child tax credit, you know, a lot of things did not go into existence until last year. But do you see any difference in the amount of service that was performed last year, 2021, compared to 2020?
The challenges the IRS employees and IT faced was implementing the third round of the stimulus payment, which was in essence towards the end of the filing season. We also had the legislation that was very beneficial to taxpayers, which reduced the unemployment compensation by $10,200 per individual. But unfortunately, that came out on March 11th. A lot of the taxpayers, a very large percent, had already filed their returns. So what the IRS had to do was pivot, change its IT so they could go back and redo those returns. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe they've already corrected about 11 to 12 million of those returns for taxpayers who have filed, but I think there's a little bit less than 1 million still to go. So between the third round of the stimulus, the unemployment, and then on top of that we had the child tax credit payments that came out, and those were monthly. That was a heavy lift for the IT, for the IRS, as well as a lot of the employees.
We know the workforce is very different than it was just in 2010.
Correct.
We had that workforce has been shrunk. Whether pay has been shrunk, and we try to save a lot of money many times. We're not good at saving money, government. We're not. So what do you do if you don't hire more people, put them in the right jobs, train them correctly? How do you address this situation to get results? And you gave us some recommendations before in your testimony. You stand by those?
I do. Again, I do think that there is end in sight. The question is, how fast can we get to that end? I have been recommending and pushing that the IRS move resources and provide. We need to. We have no option but to clear up this backlog. It should be the #1 priority. And when we filed our report last year, as you recall, the statute requires us to identify the most serious problems. We identified the processing challenges as the #1 most serious problem impacting taxpayers.
In addition to the automated collection notices, what other notices should IRS stop sending until backlogs from 21 are complete? Are there any statutory changes that are required to stop any of those notices?
The first notice in demand, which basically says you owe X dollars, is what we refer to as a statutory notice. IRS has taken the position that they are required to issue that notice. If you're looking for, with respect to taxpayers, their experience, it might be helpful for them to have that notice so they know that there is tax doing, because interest will continue to accrue and potentially penalties depending on their situation. So we do want to inform taxpayers what their obligation is. But the challenge we found is when taxpayers responded to that, IRS didn't address their correspondence timely, and the computer kept automatically generating additional notices for those who responded as well as those who did not. So what we were recommending, and I believe the IRS will be doing, is stopping those further notices on collection and stopping levies and liens when appropriate.
Thank you so much, Ms. Collins. I appreciate your responses. At this time, we're going to continue the questions. Without objection, each member will be recognized for 5 minutes to question our witness. As mentioned earlier, we will not observe the Gibbons rule in this hybrid setting and will instead go in order of seniority for questioning, alternating between majority and minority, beginning with members of the Oversight Subcommittee. Members appearing virtually are reminded to unmute yourselves when you are recognized for your 5 minutes. And I will now recognize Mr. Rice for 5 minutes for your question, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I could spend hours doing this. I'm very interested in doing it and trying to help the agency improve and help taxpayer service improve because it's obviously extremely broken. And I appreciate you being here to try to help us work through this process in 5 minutes. We'll do what we can. When I got here on this committee 7 years ago, one of the topics that was quickly brought to mind is the ancient technology that the IRS is using. Are they still using 1980s vintage technology? Mainframe computers and green screens and that type of thing? You should press your microphone.
Sorry about that. The language that we use is from the 60s, that's correct.
The COBOL, still using COBOL?
Cobalt is one of them, yes.
Yeah, and I remember 7 years ago, I was told by the taxpayer advocate at the time that there were over 300 points of failure, which meant that there were 300 different systems that only one guy knew how to program, and that if that guy died or retired, that they were out of luck. Is that still true?
It is, and I think that is one of the things that both IRS and myself, number one, we have to focus on modernizing the IRS systems. We should be a leader in the industry and tax administration globally, not falling behind everyone else.
So I've been making this case to the IRS for 7 years, and what we see now, that this crisis that we're in, is the fruit. It is what has been born by our failure to proceed with this modernization process. Because if we had modernized, we wouldn't be facing these 23 million. The number that is on the paper here is 16 million, but I think you said 23 million backlog right now?
Yeah, it depends how you define backlog. So I think what the Inspector General was referring to was the actual returns. In our calculation, we also include a correspondence and other adjustments that need to take place. So again, if you're looking at returns as 16, 17 million, if you include all the other work that they need to do with respect to the filing season, it goes north of 23 million.
All right, so I think what we need to do, Mr. Chairman, is maybe just me and you, or maybe we need to have a hearing. We need to sit down with the IRS and with the consultants that you're using. I hope you're not doing the technology plan in-house, because I don't think you have the capability to do it. I hope you have consultants working on this.
We have both, yes.
I think we probably need to sit down with these people and find out what the heck's going on, because it's been 7 years now and nothing has happened. I'm shocked to hear that you're, after I don't know how long, that the IRS agents are still manually transcribing tax returns. Oh my God, they don't use scanners even today?
They use scanners for certain activities, but to enter the paper returns, they manually sit there and transcribe them into the record, which we have concerns about accuracy problems, transcription problems. We as an agency should not be where we are.
Okay, and so we have put money up to hire new people, and you went out to hire 5,000 people, and it's been a year, right? How many people have you actually hired?
Well, I think the last 5,000 was the winter time for this filing season. Prior to that, I think they hired 2,000 or 3,000 in the accounts management and 2,000 or 3,000 in submission processing. But we wanted to bring on an additional 5,000 for the filing season.
And how many have you actually hired?
I believe it's short of 200, 172, something like that.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that we need to be paying people to stay home. We need to get people back to work.
If I could just address that comment. On the submission processing folks, those individuals came back into the facilities starting in June of 2020.
No, I'm not talking about IRS agents people staying home. I'm talking about give people incentives to get back to work.
We'd be happy for them to come work with us.
Yeah.
TAS is hiring as well, so both IRS and TAS, we're hiring.
Well, I agree with a couple of the major points that you pointed out here. One is that you said, and I'm quoting you roughly, you can't hire enough people to get out of this hole because people don't want to come to work. That's not a short-term solution to the problem, and that I think the long-term solution is that we've got to force the IRS to automate. I think the IRS is a bureaucratic dinosaur that is set in its ways and doesn't want to change. And we're going to have to force that change, Mr. Chairman. We're going to have to force them to bring.
From my observations, I think the IRS would be happy to get farther along in technology. My understanding, and again, I've only been here 2 years in this role, is the biggest challenge they have is, in essence, the continuing resolutions. We've had 97 continuing resolutions since 2001. It's very difficult to do an IT project without multiple year sustained funding. So it seems that every time we start and stop, that's
Well, I've
been a
got a
challenge.
graph here of funding of every year since 2006, and it's been around $250 million a year from 2006 until 2017 for business modernization funding budget of the IRS. Now, it did drop in 2017, 18, and 19, but it's back up to $250 million a year. And I want to sit down, Mr. Chairman, with the people in the IRS that are in charge of this modernization process and the consultants and find out what the hell's going on. Why haven't we come further than this? The fact that we're still on 1980s technology is absurd. And we have got to do better than this. We are doing a disservice to our taxpayers. And if we were further modernized, Mr. Chairman, we would not be looking at the backlog that we're looking at right
We
now.
know what the objective was back 11 years, 12 years ago. Now, we didn't get to those objectives. This is what you have. People think you can get along with less people. Fine. We got to have people that know what they're doing and are well trained. I mean, it is a pathetic record. I've heard it many times from a lot of people from these days.
Let's me and you fix it, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'm trying.
I think we'd all be happy to it. And I believe that our IT folks would love to sit down and have the opportunity to walk you through the budget, walk you through the numbers, and what the modernization plan that they envision. So I think they would welcome that.
I got a lot more I could ask, Mr. Chairman, but I will yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rice. And now we're going to go to our members also, who will have questions, 5 minutes. Please try to adhere to the 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Rice. The chair now recognizes Ms. Chu for 5 minutes. Ms. Chu.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to address the terrible state of the backlog. I've been pushing the IRS since September to offer fair and reasonable measures of penalty relief to taxpayers who've endured hardships as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I introduced H.R. 5155, the Taxpayer Penalty Protection Act, to reduce the number of tax penalties assessed, which in turn reduces the need for the IRS to process the responses to those penalties. And I co-led a letter with my Ways and Means colleague, Congressmember Sanchez, that got nearly 200 House signatures 2 weeks ago that included the measure as a key recommendation that the IRS could unilaterally implement. I'm not asking the IRS to give a free pass to bad actors. I believe we should reduce the administrative burden on the IRS to issue these notices and to reduce the number of touch points that taxpayers have with the overwhelmed agency. So I would ask unanimous consent to submit that letter here for the record. Ms. Collins, your testimony notes that it's not equitable for the IRS to wait 10 months to process the return and then turn around and subject the taxpayer to a penalty for late filing. The IRS provided penalty relief following the enactment of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, when taxpayers were hit with unexpected tax bills for not adjusting their withholdings the following tax year. However, the IRS has been unwilling to do that thus far for the 2022 filing season. In your view, what specific penalty relief should the IRS offer taxpayers at this point?
If you're talking with respect to 2022, at this point, there haven't been any penalties assessed, but are you referring back to the previous filing season?
Well, I am referring to what they should offer for the previous filing season.
It's difficult for me to answer. At this point, I don't know if there's any cause for people to have delay in their filing of the return. As you're aware, taxpayers have the ability to file an extension, and they could file up to October 15th. So at this point, I don't see any particular reason for a cause of delay that there should be penalties even charged.
What if they are supposed to be able to reply to the IRS, but they don't have the return with which they need to file?
So I think you're referring to the previous year's returns have not been processed, and you're concerned
Yes.
that there's penalties associated with that. If the taxpayer filed and the IRS has not processed, then the IRS should not be assessing failure to file penalties if it's the IRS's situation where it's sitting there waiting to be processed. So those penalties should not be assessed, in my opinion.
That's exactly what I'm referring to. So thank you for that. Mr. Chair, I also think taxpayers should understand that the budget cuts to the IRS over the last decade, compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic, has really hamstrung the agency. And I commend the IRS employees for their dedication to the service. And I remain committed to ensure that this agency gets the resources it needs. I'd ask unanimous consent to submit a letter for the record that I and 48 representatives sent to the Treasury Secretary yesterday regarding the funding needed to bring the IRS into the 21st century.
Without objection.
Thank you. Ms. Collins, one of the legislative recommendations in your testimony supports multi-year funding for the IRS, something IRS Commissioner Reddick has also advocated for. Luckily, the Build Back Better Act would make significant investments in the IRS to address many of the deficiencies facing the agency. Would you please provide some insight to how the $80 billion for the IRS, as included in the Build Back Better Act, would improve the agency and its ability to serve taxpayers, including how the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate works?
Yeah, I think infusing capital into the IRS is very important. Needless to say, I focus on the service side of the house, so to speak. So I would like to see that we make sure that we cover and have adequate funds for taxpayer service. You know, we now use the term taxpayer experience. We want their experience with the IRS to be a good one. We want people to continue to comply, and more importantly, we want to be responsive to taxpayers. So I would recommend additional funding that we make sure that the service part is as well funded, as well as the enforcement side, as well as IT. It really needs, across all lanes in the IRS, to rebuild it to be a tax administration that we think the country deserves, and in my opinion, it does deserve.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Chu. The chair now recognizes Ms. Wolarski for 5 minutes. Ms. Wolarski, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to you, Ms. Collins, for being with us today. I'm grateful for the work that you and your Taxpayer Advocate Service provides to my constituents with complicated tax matters. I do feel like a broken record, though. Once again, I find myself before this subcommittee raising the backlog of the millions upon millions of original and amended tax returns that the IRS is currently facing. What's more concerning is that there appears to be no end in sight, even as we move into the 2022 tax season. Almost every day, my staff and I hear constituents who are caught in the backlog. It's Hoosiers from all kinds of families, individuals, small business, you name it, many of whom have specific financial struggles and can hardly afford more delays. These Hoosiers need results, and they need the refunds that the IRS owes them. The taxpayer advocate can't take over the IRS's role in processing returns, but they play a significant role in expediting what has been an infuriating process for many of my constituents. So, Ms. Collins, my question is, the taxpayer advocate having conversations with the IRS on how they're categorizing and prioritizing the outstanding amended returns? Does the relative amount of a refund claim or the relative delay in processing factor factor into a returns prioritization? Are returns with refunds that require joint committee approval lagging meaningfully behind other amended returns in the processing time?
In essence, what we're currently doing with the IRS is part of the surge team. We are working with our counterparts in the service center, as we are going to, TAS cases are going to be assigned to a particular area within the service center, and we're going to have priority for the TAS cases to make sure those are through the system. So taxpayers who are dealing with hardships and other challenges, we should be prioritizing that work on a go-forward basis.
And can you outline your office's position on working with affected individuals? How do you instruct your advocates to prioritize their casework? And what's the response time and frequency of communication you're targeting to provide our constituents and congressional staff with the status updates on active cases?
Yeah, this has been a tough year for not only taxpayers, but also IRS employees, and TAS employees are no different. We've had a very difficult last 2 years as well. Our case inventory has increased, and with respect to congressional referrals, it's increased sixfold. What we are trying to do is to have our contact at a minimum of once a month, and some of the offices are able to do it more frequently, either weekly or bi-weekly, to give you updates on particular cases. We do look for hardship. If the hardship of taxpayers experience a particular hardship, we try and prioritize that above some of the other work. So as I said, we're scrambling, but we are doing the best we can, and our employees are working really hard, and I'll give them a shout out right now, because not only IRS employees working hard, but our TAS folks are really trying to do the best they can to help all taxpayers, including your constituents.
I got it. I just have one more question. Do you have suggestions on how my office and this committee can work with you and the IRS to expedite some of these returns?
Happy to take it offline and explore suggestions or ideas. I mean, that is essence what TAS does, is we work with your offices for hardship and taxpayers and issues, and again, happy to open up that door or phone and let's have a future dialogue.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
For your questions, they were very on target. And now the chair would recognize Mr. Schneider for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pascarell, and I want to thank you for hosting this important hearing, and Ms. Collins, thank you for joining us. We regularly read stories about the many challenges facing the IRS, and we, of course, are not just talking about the upcoming filing season, but also 2020, even going back further than that, but the pandemic has certainly had an effect. I just want to confirm some of the things that you've said, and also we got in the preparing for this. My understanding is that the volume for the IRS has gone up 20% since 2010. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that the funding in that same period, taking into account inflation, has gone down by 20%?
I think my recollection was 17-18%, but yes.
Okay, I'm going to stick to 20 just for easy math, but if we can reduce a little bit by the 18. But if I have something where my demands are going up by 20%, and my capacity is going down by 20% in the same period, that means my shortfall, assuming I was at capacity meeting the requirements of the organization, was at full capacity in 2010, the gap now is 50%. At 18%, maybe it's a little bit less than that, but that's a significant gap. My understanding is also that, as my colleague earlier said, if it's $250 million for technology, what I heard is 90% of the IT budget goes to maintenance, not to systems development. Is that true?
Yeah, a very large portion of the budget for IT is what I would call keeps the lights on, keeping the Band-Aids, keeping the software, keeping it going. IRS's IT folks have been trying very hard to what we call decommission, so that we can shut down certain legacy programs. But until we are able to modernize, it's very difficult to shut down the current legacy. So until those legacy systems are shut off, it does impact their budget.
Right. And just to be clear, when I started working with computers, I moved into, I finished school at the same time as PCs were coming on board. COBOL was already leaving at that time. 40 years later, COBOL is certainly obsolete. I would say that modernization is not splicing wires or fixing bugs in COBOL. We need to move forward if we're going to address our challenges. Having said that, I also want to make a very important point. I hear from my constituents over and over again about the incredible service and the resource that TAS is for our community. The Taxpayer Advocate Services has been throughout the pandemic helping address many of the challenges taxpayers are facing as best as they can in very difficult circumstances. So before going on, let me just say thank you to you and to the TAS workforce for your commitment, perseverance through not just difficult, but historically difficult times. Clearly is a challenge. As we look forward, and to my colleague and friend from South Carolina, count me in working with you to try to help modernize the tax service, improving both service as well as compliance, making sure that people are paying the taxes that they are required to pay. But as we look at the current tax filing season, what advice, Ms. Collins, would you give taxpayers and our team, our congressional casework teams, to deal with the backlogs, to deal with amending returns, to working around the challenges we have in this process?
Well, first of all, I want to address your comment about thanking our folks. I do appreciate it. I always like hearing when we do well, and I always welcome hearing when we can have areas of improvement. So thank you for commenting about the folks you're dealing with. I would say my mantra right now, I think it's similar to the IRS. Number one, we need to help and encourage as many people as possible to file electronic. We need to get rid of the paper. There are a lot of members in our society, it is more difficult, they don't have access, but we need to figure out a way how to get better access to those individuals, either get them out to VITA, have them use the free file on the IRS website, or other means to get them to file electronically. That is the number one thing taxpayers can do to help the IRS and help the system so that all taxpayers get their money timely. Second is request direct deposit. Again, that reduces a lot of the processing that the IRS has to do. It's automated. And third, triple check for errors. Again, we saw last year the differences on the recovery rebate credit with the IRS records versus the taxpayer records. That caused a major challenge in the backlog. My concern is we have a third round of the stimulus payment, plus we have potentially 6 or more payments, monthly payments from the child tax credit, where it could cause discrepancies, which would slow down the processing for all taxpayers. So if we can get those 3 things right, it'll make a huge difference.
Thank you. I have more questions, but I'm out of time. I will say we send out a weekly newsletter. We have other communications, as do all my colleagues. We are putting the information you just shared as much as possible in those communications so that our constituents understand what they have to do. But if there are other things, please share them with us. We will get them out. And again, thanks to everyone on your team who is working so hard. It's going to be a long process, but we have to work together to make sure we take care of our constituents and taxpayers get the service they deserve. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder, for very good questions. And I want to thank our witness so far. Excellent job. The chair now recognizes Ms. Miller for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Pasquale and Ranking Member Rice. And thank you, Ms. Collins, for your advocacy today. You know, it's pretty obvious that the IRS has had a difficult year adjusting to working during COVID-19 pandemic. And Ms. Collins, I really appreciate the work that you and your colleagues do and how you've been supporting our hardworking taxpayers as they also attempt to deal with the oftentimes frustrating bureaucracy that they have to deal with. Americans today, rightly so, have so many concerns with the proposed changes at the IRS, including the use of facial recognition technology, increased scrutiny over the small dollar transfers from services such as PayPal and Cash App and Venmo, and also the proposed doubling of the IRS workforce to monitor more Americans' taxes. That's why I believe our role on the Oversight Subcommittee is so important, along with how we help our taxpayer advocates provide to everyday Americans. Ms. Collins, I understand that the IRS is reassigning a reported 1,200 current IRS employees in other areas of the agency to focus on the processing backlog. The number of employees being reassigned is reported to be around 1,200. In your opinion, is that 1,200 number enough, Or should the IRS take an even more drastic action to make a larger and more timely impact on the backlog?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I believe it is a good first step, but I do think what we need to do is look for other resources. Again, I know that the IRS is considering outsourcing, in essence, for some of the clerical tasks where you wouldn't need a specific IRS training to help them with the processing. When you think about processing of the tax returns, and I recently spent a day at the Kansas City campus. So, by the way, shout out to all those people for spending the day, and they were very helpful walking me through it. But there are piles and of just tax returns throughout the campus waiting to be processed. And it is a kind of a human assembly line or a human supply chain where it comes in to the loading docks, through the mail sorting, through where the person does the stamping, they do the remittance where they pull out the checks, they pull out staples. It goes through the process all the way to the transcription, to the reviews. It is a manual process. That needs to be updated. That needs to be changed. So that is a real challenge for the IRS and the IRS employees, and it slows down the payment for our taxpayers.
I understand that. And I also understand that the IRS is telling taxpayers who have not had last year's tax returns processed to enter 0 as their adjusted gross income when they file this year's returns. This will be a real challenge to communicate to taxpayers, and it may prove especially difficult for constituents that don't use electronic software when they file their taxes each year.
Yeah,
What will happen to taxpayers? I was going to say, what will happen to the taxpayers who don't receive the message and file a return with a positive AGI number on their return?
Yeah, what the 0 entry is when you file electronically, when you talk to the IRS computer system, in essence, it's checking to see who you are, and what it does is it verifies your last year's adjusted gross income so that when you file electronically, Erin Collins's return will go through. If my return was not processed last year, the recommendation is to put 0, because right now the computer does not see my previous return. So my AGI should be 0. That way you can file electronically. You don't have to file a paper return. But I agree with you. We need to get that message out there. And again, it only impacts those who are trying to file electronically. We want everyone to do so, so we need to get that message out to taxpayers.
Okay, thank you so much. I yield back the rest of my time.
Answers, but Tom and I are just sitting here thinking about, this was the same situation 10 years ago and 3 years ago. And we don't seem to be making much progress. And when we're talking into the wind most of the time. The director of the IRS has specific statutory responsibilities. You know them better than I do. He must adhere. Now, if he doesn't have the money, he doesn't have the resources, he doesn't have air conditioning, he doesn't have heat, okay, I understand all of those things. But if it's the same when he leaves as when he got there, then he's not doing his job. I don't care who he is. Just like us. And we have to do these things. I've never been to the Kansas City facility. Have you?
I did. I spent the day a week ago.
And how did you conclude when you?
It was most illuminating. First of all, my heart goes out to all the families that are waiting for those returns to be processed. As I walked down the hall, I didn't see pounds of paper or mounds of paper. Those are families. Those are individuals. Those are small companies that are waiting for those refunds to be processed. But I also met the employees. They are working very hard. So the challenge is, right now, there's a huge hole that the IRS started when we, in essence, shut down the facilities. We haven't gotten out of that hole, and it's slowly building. And I believe the commissioner and others have heard it. They see it's a problem, and in my opinion, we need to do all hands on and get this fixed now. We cannot go into another filing season without eliminating the backlog. I think if you ask the commissioner today, he would tell you he wholeheartedly agrees.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we should go.
I'm sorry?
I'll be happy to join you.
We should go to Kansas City and see it for ourselves.
That's a song. Yes. I think it'd be a very excellent idea, and maybe right in first week of April, when things are quiet.
I was going to say, first week in April in the Kansas City, maybe a good time to go because it'll be very busy.
Yes, and we'll know by then how we're doing compared to last year.
Yeah, we are monitoring the numbers weekly. We started that last year and working with the IRS. We have encouraged the IRS. I think we're close to getting there, where they're going to put what I refer to as a dashboard, so they can inform taxpayers where they are in the processing. We are currently processing returns filed in the week of fill in the blank.
Isn't it true that you said to me a while back that maybe we could have better communications even with the post office?
My understanding from working with Ken Corbin, who is the Commissioner of Wage and Income, is that we have I'd say a decent relationship with the post office. We do inform them of when we do have large volumes and send them information. So I personally have not had any issues with respect to the post office.
Okay, the chair now recognizes Ms. Plaskett for 5 minutes. Ms. Plaskett, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Your inquiry was very illuminating, along with my other colleagues. Thank you so much, Ms. Miller and others, for your questions as well. They're pretty much along the lines of some of the questions that I hope to be asking. Ms. Collins, thank you for joining us today and sharing your insight and knowledge, your candor, and discussing the issues that are going to occur during the 2022 tax filing season, and assistance to taxpayers to navigate the IRS is critically important. I'm also grateful that you recognize that those piles of papers are people, our families, our businesses, and it's all of our jobs to ensure that they are appropriately taken care of. When we know that Commissioner's surge initiative to relocate IRS employees to address backlog will not necessarily add employees to process the millions of returns in the backlog. You talked about needing additional assistance. Do you have a number as to how many people you think are necessary to meet the backlog and the demand that would bring us up to speed or bring us up to date?
Again, my understanding, and this is in the process of standing up, is that the surge team, as we call it, will be working the account management cases. I think we need something similar in the in submission processing section, whether it be technical resources or help with, as I was trying to describe, the manual supply chain. We can get, and possibly outside vendors, we could probably do that immediately to help in that process, which would free up IRS employees to do other pieces of the submission processing work. But I do believe we're going to need more than the 1,200.
Okay. Can you explain the implementation process for implementation of the recommendations made in the 2021 National Taxpayer Advocates Annual Report to Congress? Because I guess once these recommendations are published and provided to Congress, they are subject to a vetting process. Are they acted upon or simply put away until the next report? What happens after that?
So this year I tried to something a little bit different with the annual report. I'm trying to do it a little bit more collaboratively. So throughout the year, we've been working with the IRS on particular issues rather than just waiting to file it at the end of December. So I would be surprised if anyone in the IRS was not aware of any of the issues we were raising by the time we filed the final report. By statute, the IRS has, and I'm going to get the number wrong, I think it's 90 days to provide an official response. We will be posting that response on our line on taxpayeradvocate.gov. We will include that. But more important for me is I want to continue the dialogue. I believe I do have a good relationship with the other heads of the business units as well as some of the executives. We are all on the same floor, and whether it's good or bad for them, I can walk down the hall. I know where they are, and I know what their phone numbers are. So I try and keep that dialogue as open as possible, and when we have issues, I try and raise them and not have to wait to raise them in a report.
Thank you. And then I guess finally, I once again want to just let you know how important you are to the people of the Virgin Islands. With our mirror tax code system, getting this correct is everything to us. We only have an IRS that we are dealing with in terms of filing our taxes, not state. And sometimes mirror code laws can get a little convoluted for a general layperson. While we know that citizens can utilize the Taxpayer Advocate Program, can you let me know what nonprofit organizations, what organization or what group can taxpayers reach out to assistance if they cannot get in touch? Are there nonprofits for them to get in touch with if they cannot get in touch with the Taxpayer Advocate Service?
It depends on what their issue is, but they may be able to reach out to some of our low-income tax clinics that can assist with IRS challenges, either in examination, appeals, potential litigation, or collection issues or other problems that a taxpayer may be having. We are looking to add a low-income tax clinic in your area, but because of COVID, we're able to use basically LITCs, assuming there's not a state restriction. You can use LITCs in other jurisdictions to help taxpayers. I mean, that has been a real plus of COVID, is that we are more in a virtual environment. It's easier to get a hold of and use resources outside your immediate area. So I would recommend they look into an LITC for assistance.
Thank you. You know, Mr. Chair, I think I do not believe in adding more bureaucracy or creating more government. I know that may be surprising from my colleagues on the other side to hear me saying that. But one of the things I do have concern with is you see and hear on radio and TV so many organizations that are advocating that they can help you. And my concern is that many people will be taken advantage of in that process when the Taxpayer Advocate Group does such a good job. I yield back.
Questions, your time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Murphy for 5 minutes. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member Rice. And thank you, Ms. Collins. Gosh, all I can say is what a mess. What a mess. I'm appreciative of the work that you and the Taxpayer Advocate Service do, but there are clearly some major issues that need to be fixed and fixed yesterday. You know, as we enter this season, as you pointed out very well, there are backlogs of millions and millions of returns. And upon listening to your testimony, it's very concerning to me that I guess these the checks come in and they get cashed, and then the average return, I believe, for an American, you know, many million of those is around $2,700. And in this inflationary environment, that money is needed terribly, and it's wrong for the American government to be holding on to that money when it should be rightfully returned to the taxpayers. And, you know, we've gone through the COVID thing now, and we've made our excuses. But, you know, I'm not going to buy the government excuses anymore for government agencies to not be back working full-time in full place when we American industry are doing the exact same thing. And, you know, to hear some of the issues that are happening with the IRS now, if you ran a private corporation right now, you'd be seeking bankruptcy long ago. So I just don't buy it. Just because we're a government doesn't mean we can't be efficient, can't mean we can't run like a business, and we can't do things the right way. So I just don't buy that excuse anymore. I don't think the IRS needs to be bailed out with money. I think they have, as I understand, $1 billion in unspent funds. So it's about running the business correctly. So I do appreciate what you do. I would love to ask you a few questions. You know, it's my understanding that last year in 2021, that only 11% of the customer service calls were actually answered by a human. Are you aware of that, and do you have any comment on that?
Yes, we've been reporting that out for the last year as to what the percentage of calls that get through to a customer service representative. Unfortunately, last year, during its height of the calls, it was as low as 4% during the filing season. I think that's when the American Rescue Plan Act was enacted. We, IRS, received a lot of phone calls. On one hand, I guess you can give the IRS kudos that they answered more calls last year than typical. I think it was 4 or 8 million calls. The challenge is they had 3 times the amount of the calls, which meant fewer people were able to actually get through to speak to a customer service representative.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the challenges. I'm not here, casting aspersions and everything on our IRS workers, but I do cast aspersions on why they're not back full-time. This is I'm just going to say this is the Biden administration pay to stay at home kind of thing, and we don't need to be doing that anymore. I'm interested in and looking at all these backlogs and hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money that is needed, and these millions of returns that are not back. He talked about the technology issue being an issue, that we don't have the right technology and things are being done by hand. But then on the other hand, we're saying, no, we need 80,000 more workers. Can you kind of expand upon that? Which do you think is really the method that we move forward, not only to get rid of our terrible, terrible backlog now, but actually prevent that in the future?
Yeah, again, I think the challenge is the IRS needs assistance across all lanes. If you're looking at the filing season, I think we, as an agency, need to automate more. We need to encourage those who want to file electronically to be able to file. There are barriers. There are a number of companies as well as individuals that attach a particular form to the return, and if you do so, you cannot file electronically. So we can fix those problems. If we could eliminate the barriers and encourage more people to file electronically, that would be very helpful to the system. I think the biggest challenge, what I've seen, and again, I've been here just about 2 years, I look at arriving at the time of COVID as a real opportunity. There are a lot of challenges and a lot of things that we can help the IRS try and fix, but there are challenges. The IRS's employees, the numbers have dropped considerably, and as a result, something has to give. I do not want to see customer service give. I think if anything, with our Chief Taxpayer Experience Officer, Ken Corbin, who started last summer, we really need to improve the service for taxpayers. And what I'm seeing due to COVID and being the fact that the IRS is stretched a bit thin, we are not doing the job that we should be doing as an agency.
Well, thank you. And I applaud my colleague for saying she doesn't want any more bureaucracy. We want efficiency. That's the way our government should run. And if it does, it actually helps everybody, costs less money, and actually helps our taxpayers. So thank you for the work that you're doing. We appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back my time.
Thank you. Now the chair recognizes Mr. Doggett for 5 minutes. Mr. Doggett.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Collins, for your testimony and your work. With over 10 million paper returns not yet processed from last year, I can certainly understand why you've described them in your testimony as the IRS's kryptonite. Many of these returns are processed right here in my hometown of Austin, where, as you know, we have one of 3 IRS submission processing centers that handle paper returns. I've met with employees there over the years. I know there is a dedicated workforce there that is working hard to try to address this problem. I've also heard firsthand from them over previous months some of the challenges that they faced in being back in the workplace because of questions about adequate protection, social distancing, testing, and the like. In addition, as far as recruiting and retaining workers, there's been a real problem about wages. I've long advocated for a $15 minimum wage. I'm pleased that we finally have a federal minimum about to go into effect of $15. But I can tell you that here in Austin, that's certainly not a living wage, even if worked full time at that rate. And many people can make more money in fast food even than working on these IRS jobs. Ms. Collins, what else do you believe the IRS should be doing now to ensure that it can retain and hire a sufficient workforce to provide the prompt professional response that taxpayers deserve?
Yeah, I think if we look at the midterm and long term for purposes of the IRS, the royal we, IRS, could do a better job with recruiting. And the commissioner always refers to sort of 3 lanes: those coming right out of college, those beginning their careers, those midterm careers, and those senior folks like myself who come back to the government to provide their knowledge and experience to the government. We as an organization need to do a better job attracting these individuals to bring them back. IRS is a great place to work. It provides tremendous opportunities for individuals to build their careers. But the challenge is, I think part of it, is a branding. I mean, a lot of people are, when you say, I'm going to work for the IRS, it's like, why are you working there? But it is a great place. I mean, the IRS, when you think about it, it brings in 95% of the revenue that you all use on purpose of this country. It is a vital organization. It is very important to everyone. And I think the commissioner has said this more than once. It probably touches more individuals than any other agency. And so I think we need to collectively figure out how to get the right people in the positions and increase where necessary. I'm a big believer of, we just don't bring bodies in just to have bodies in. We need to bring the right folks in for the right purpose, rather than just willy-nilly hiring. So I think it does have to be strategic, and we have to look at where our concerns. Are we focusing on service? Are we focusing on enforcement? What are the areas that we need to build the IRS back in?
I noticed that, thank you. I noticed in your annual report that you write that the most serious problems encountered by taxpayers last year resulted, in your words, from long-standing underfunding of the IRS. As you're aware, over the past decade, staffing is down 20%. The number of returns that you have to process is up about 20%. I hear many colleagues talking today about what a mess this is. We were pleading for additional resources for the IRS during the Obama administration, Treasury officials, IRS officials coming to our committee, and their pleas were rejected. This lack of resources is not an accident. It was intentional by those who wanted IRS to fail, who targeted the cuts, so that in real dollars, the IRS budget is about 22% smaller today than it was a decade ago. Not only does IRS not have enough workers to process the returns on time and to answer the calls, it also lacks the resources to ensure that those who are up at the top, the audit rates of corporations have fallen by half, rates for millionaires by 60%. It's estimated that a top 1% are getting away with not paying $160 billion in taxes that they owe. When the richest few and the large corporations don't pay their fair share, the ordinary individual taxpayer and the small business have to shoulder the difference. Last year's Tax Advocate report said it's economically irrational to underfund the IRS. I certainly agree. I think the IRS budget has been sabotaged. We do need to work together to find a way to overcome it. Ms. Collins, how would the IRS ability to meet the challenge it faces today be different if it were adequately funded?
Chairman, I notice the time is up. Can I answer that, or I can take it offline and meet with the congressman?
You got you don't have any more time left, nor does the person asking the questions. Mr. Doggett, he'll give you, the young lady will give you something in writing. Is that okay with you?
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Collins.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Collins. Now we'll turn to, in person, Mr. Hershford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this critically important hearing with the National Taxpayer Advocate to discuss the challenges so many of our constituents face. After the challenges that taxpayers faced in the 2021 tax season, many of our constituents need to be aware of the challenges that may be carried into this upcoming tax season. Any new challenges may occur, so thank you for being here, Ms. Collins. I'm also glad we have organizations participating in the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance VITA program with the IRS to help our constituents prepare their taxes, and the Taxpayer Advocate Service to help resolve tax problems once they have been filed. I also want to say thank you to all of those volunteers all across the country, and especially in my state of Nevada. And I also want to commend the IRS and the IRS employees themselves. I don't know that anyone mentioned it in this hearing, but over this last year, under the leadership of President Biden and Democrats in Congress, we were able to implement the increase in the child tax credit, which helped lift 50% of children out of poverty. And it was the IRS who processed those payments. So I want to say thank you to everyone who has been involved in that effort. But I want to highlight the work that the Nevada Free Taxes Coalition provides to thousands of Southern Nevadans every year. The coalition provides free tax assistance to low and moderate income individuals and families, people with limited English proficiency, veterans, seniors, individuals with disabilities, and people living in rural areas. This work is critical to ensure that all Nevadans receive the tax credits that they deserve. The Nevada Free Taxes Coalition does great work partnering with local community organizations in my district like the Doolittle Senior Center, our Pearson Community Center, and the Pahrump Community Library in one of my rural areas. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, many of the VITA sites in Nevada had to close, and others are offering limited services. I understand that the Tax Advocate Service is an independent organization within the IRS that has communicated and assisted taxpayers over the years with tax problems, especially during the last tax season. With that, I want to focus my question on this point. Many taxpayers in my district have mentioned that their tax returns have been delayed for an obstructive amount of time due to processing issues. Others have stated that there was a severe lack of communication between them and the IRS. When taxpayers are unable to get in contact with customer service representatives at the IRS by phone, and the, quote, "Where's my refund" online tool is limited to only show what has been processed, many people are left in the dark with questions unanswered and fearful of future issues occurring. Now, most people know that they can contact our congressional office, and I welcome them to do so. But unfortunately, we're hearing reports that the taxpayer advocate will be may have challenges in assisting our congressional caseworkers during the upcoming filing season. So, what specifically can IRS caseworkers do to help support this issue, and what are some other ways that taxpayers can communicate with the IRS to get their questions answered and not go months with their problems being unheard?
Yeah, so with respect to TAS, we recently provided guidance to all your local offices. I believe it went out on Friday, so whether or not you've had an opportunity to see it, with respect to the upcoming filing season, the cases that we'll be able to work taxpayer and assist them with. So hopefully, if you haven't had a chance to review that, happy to walk you through that. But we are taking a large percentage of the cases within a fairly early period of time in the filing season if there are particular challenges. So we do have it itemized by different things. So, for example, if they have, we refer to a pre-wage verification. So if your W-2 doesn't match your tax return, those are cases that TAS can come in and help you. We usually wait for a number of weeks until after they file the return so that the IRS can try and process it. So we have that guidance coming out. So we heard it loud and clear. Believe me, I know taxpayers are struggling. We hear it all the time. I hear it from individual taxpayers, practitioners. This was a really tough year for taxpayers.
Can you share your website information and phone number that our constituents can use to contact TAS?
Sure. Two things. The website is www.taxpayeradvocate.gov or irs.gov. And on there, there's a section that's called how can I contact you, where you contact. And if you pull it up, there's a map of the United States. It breaks it out by city, by state, and that will give you the local taxpayer advocate's phone number as well as their fax number. And that's the best way to get a hold of the local taxpayer advocate in your particular area.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Schmucker, for 5 minutes, please. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this important hearing today. And thank you for allowing me to do that. And thank you for scheduling this. And I must say it's been a little frustrating, and some of the comments that I have today have been shared by others. And I certainly appreciate the taxpayer advocates' work. Appreciate IRS work and efforts as well. I appreciate the communication. But at the end of the day, the job just simply is not getting done for our constituents. And frankly, I know it's been a very, very difficult year. But we have heard today multiple times that it's also the result of years of inaction and a lack of upgrade to use current technology, and that's frustrating to me. So Ms. Collins, what is your best estimate of the current size of the returns backlog? Do you know how many?
Yes, again, depends on how you slice and dice the data, but in essence, the paper returns that are waiting processing for individuals returns as well, for individuals as well as businesses is 5.6 million. Those are returns that were filed last year.
How long do you think it'll take the IRS to dig out of that?
IRS is working returns first in, first out, so they will be working any of the returns that were filed in 2021 first, prior to working any paper returns that are filed in this current filing season. Again, that is one of the reasons it's so important to get current on the backlog, because the current paper returns.
Do you have any idea the amount of time before we're caught up?
Last year, we had 11 million returns carrying over. It took them till June to get those 11 million returns processed. So if you have 5.6, and they're now putting resources, maybe May, June.
Okay, again, we're constantly hearing from constituents in my office who are frustrated that they can't get answers, so it's been frustrating even to go to the Taxpayer Advocate Service, your office, and it takes too long. Still takes far too long to get answers. Now, I will say, just this afternoon, my team and I spoke with the local taxpayer advocate for Philadelphia. And I appreciated her update and her ideas on how to improve, and I'd like to thank her for her important work. She mentioned that 90% of inquiries that she receives come from congressional offices like mine. Wondering if you could talk about some of the challenges that you face in getting answers to cases that are coming from our office, and what efforts could be made to improve those services either inside of TAS or in the IRS.
Yeah, last year we received 6 times more referrals from your offices than we have historically. We are trying to centralize some of our
because
contact.
Constituents are so frustrated. They're
sorry?
calling us because they're not. It's because constituents are so frustrated. They're calling us because they can't get answers from you or from the IRS.
And I understand, and I don't disagree. Unfortunately, I don't have the magic answer. But what we are trying to do is consolidate some of our resources so that we can be better in our responses to the congressional offices. And we are internally talking about procedures that we want to change on a go-forward basis, and we'll be reaching out to the local offices as those move forward.
And then the final point I'd like to make has already been made, and I agree with the ranking member's comments in regards to why don't we fix this? And I'd love to be part of a possible solution here. And I agree with Chairman, your comments earlier when you said if someone leaves office as commissioner or whatever the position might be in the IRS and things are the same when they left as when they came in, something is wrong. And frankly, yes, I understand that we are responsible to provide the dollars, but I was a member of the Oversight Committee for the past year now. We've had multiple hearings where the commissioner or others were there from IRS. I haven't heard a plan, really. I guess there probably is one, but why is the commissioner not out there? Why is there not a plan being laid out where we're going to solve these problems? That's what's frustrating. I feel like we've had these same problems. We knew they're there, and nothing's being done about them, and the case isn't being made to advocate for funds and laying out a plan to improve them. So it's frustrating. I think it's got to be fixed. It's unbelievable to me that a large agency like the IRS just simply does not have the latest technology. And so, Ranking Member Rice, you talked about fixing this. Other members have as well. I'd certainly be looking forward to work with you on that. And isn't it a unique opportunity right now, Ms. Collins? Because I believe at least what was said in one of the previous hearings was that the IRS still has about $1 billion in COVID relief funds that hasn't been spent. So wouldn't this be a time when we perhaps would have a unique opportunity to make some of these upgrades that need to be made?
Oh, Mr. Schmucker, it's like the pandemic. it's exposed other things. And before the pandemic, we had problems with the IRS. But those people are working hard. I've seen examples of that many, many times, as you have, and I think you'll agree with me. The person who takes the position of the commissioner of the IRS has to show some progress while he or she was there in order to address the problems of doing whatever they can to lessen the burden on the workers who are there. I haven't seen too much of that, to be very honest with you, and that's giving you my perception. And I try to say it like I see it. I like to give people chances and opportunity. I think that the individual before us today, our witness, in a very short period of time, I've learned more from her than I've learned from a lot of other people put together. But it still hasn't fixed the problem. I think she wants to do it, but she's the advocate. We got to get the commissioners to do it and be committed to it and improve the situation. That's why we had the hearing. Now I'd like to turn to Mr. Gomez for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you're right. The Taxpayer Advocate's Office has been crucial for my team in the district. And we've helped a lot of different constituents to get the refunds that they were owed. We've over $200,000 in just last year to constituents that need it. And a lot of this has been exposed because of the pandemic. We passed historic rescue plans not only in 2020, but also in 2021 under the American Rescue Plan. And that's helped a lot of working people in my district. And my district is a tale of two districts. I have very wealthy areas and then very working class and low income areas. I have people, $1 million homes to people who are barely scraping by. And a lot of folks in my district need the IRS to function so that they can actually survive. Relief that I think in my district helps small businesses, working families, but it's really still difficult to navigate. We've set up programs for people who never filed tax returns to have to access the IRS website in order to use it. And we also had small businesses that were trying to determine what's the best way to use the Paycheck Protection Program loan they received or the Economic Injury Disaster Grant, and they were loan, and they were trying to figure that out. But a lot of these folks don't have the team of lawyers, the accountants, the CPAs to really help them navigate that system. Just this past weekend, I was talking to a constituent. I was going door to door, and this constituent mentioned how he still hasn't received his tax return. And I asked, and he was having difficulty accessing the IRS, getting the information that they needed. But most people didn't. I asked them to contact my office, and we're now working on that case. But there's thousands of people like that. And one of the things that I wanted to do in the American Rescue Plan is if we're going to increase funding for the IRS, we wanted to make sure that there was also a set aside and a bigger amount for the taxpayer advocate. Because this is what it's about. It's about making sure not only do we have the revenue to fund our government operations, but that the American people don't feel that they're being ignored. And I believe the taxpayer advocate does a great job. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and I wholeheartedly endorse increasing the TAS budget because we do, in my opinion, provide a very valuable service for taxpayers, and unfortunately, there just aren't enough of us. We're small, but we're mighty.
Yeah, agreed. How have a lot of people talk about the decrease in appropriations over the years, and then I think by 20%, and you've seen a 20% increase in filings. How have the cuts to the IRS impacted low-income taxpayers in particular?
Well, I think, again, it just gets down to the level of service. What is the IRS able to do for taxpayers across the board? But as you pointed out, lower income folks don't have accountants, they don't have the lawyers, they don't have people that they could actually pay for. So they're the ones that truly reach out to the IRS through the customer service. They go visit the taxpayer assistance centers. They need the additional service. And when the IRS is not able to perform the level of service that they should, they are the ones that are indirectly harmed.
And another thing, the enhanced child tax credit has yet to be paid out to about half of the people that are eligible. And the earned income tax credit that was expanded for 2021, what kind of challenges do you see for the fact that so many people still haven't claimed that tax credit?
Well, I think part of it's educational, letting people know that that is, as you said, half the credit. They still need to file a tax return to receive the other half of the credit. So part of that's onus on all of us. I think the IRS, as well as all of our tax partners, communities, and I would even challenge your offices, we need to get the word out to individuals to let them understand what the benefits that Congress has provided and what they need to accomplish that. And some of those folks may not be typically filing tax returns, so we need to get them in the system.
Yeah, and that's something that we've worked with quite a bit. And we know that there's also some pilot programs that are going on that some community groups have received funding in order to help with some of this. So I think it's something that we have to do, and it helps those working class individuals. I know that there's a lot to do in order to be more effective, and reforming the IRS is something that we need to look at, but also just how do we make sure that working people who often are left behind and don't have the access and the attorneys, as we mentioned, or the CPAs to help them, make it a little easier for them to get the returns, because I know that they rely on it, just like my family did when I was growing up. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Two things. Mr. Horsford also mentioned the question of volunteers. I visit them every year. A lot of people who do it for no pay.
Yeah.
They are helping mostly lower income people, and they're doing it with not trying to push the person out of the place, to answer their questions. Those volunteer programs are very important, not just to my constituency.
As you said, those volunteers, they're doing it because they care.
They do.
They're volunteering their time. They put in a tremendous amount of hours. So across the country, we have a plethora of individuals who are really trying to give back to the system and trying to do the right thing. So again, I appreciate them, and kudos out to them for doing it year after year. It's a difficult position.
Without objection, I would like to enter some questions into the record from Congresswoman Sanchez of California, who could not be here. Please, we will take this into consideration. We'll get the questions to the IRS, and we'll get them answered, and we'll get them back to Ms. Sanchez. Correct? Very good, very good. I'd like to thank our witness for joining us today. You were terrific. Please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record. With that, the subcommittee stands adjourned, and thank you, everybody, for cooperating.
Thank you.